What's up, everybody? Ron Placone here. Got some shows coming up. May 23rd, Seattle, Washington. Have not been to Seattle in a while. Cannot wait to see you. And in June, we are going to be at the Hollywood Fringe Festival with my new play, Termination Fee, which is a scathing commentary on the American healthcare system. Termination Fee features myself, Andrew Saxena, and Sarah K. Godot, and it is being produced in collaboration with Fringe Management and Plaque One Productions. The dates on that, June 8th, June 16th, June 21st, June 24th, and June 29th. That's at the Black Box Theater at the Broadwater. Wonderful, wonderful theater in Hollywood. You can get tickets and all information at ronplacone.com. And we're going to be making a feature film out of Termination Fee as well. So I'm really excited about this project. Can't wait for you to see it. Tickets and all information, again, ronplacone.com. What's up, everybody? The wait is finally over and totally over. Left at Wall is available now, right now. You can get Left at Wall on Apple TV, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can get it on demand. You can buy it on DVD. The wait is totally over. Just type in Left at Wall on your search bar on your smart TV, and you can find a bunch of ways to get it. You can watch it now. Again, that's Left at Wall, wherever you get your movies. Episode 87, Brian Kiley. Brian Kiley is a comedic force. He's a stand-up and a writer. He wrote for Conan for nearly 30 years. He's won Emmys, and he's among the most respected comedy writers in the game. He's the type of comic where when you're on the bill with him, you never want to miss his set. I was stoked when he agreed to do the show. Please welcome to the show, Brian Kiley. Brian Kiley, good to see you.
Good to see you, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks so much for doing this, man. I mean, you're one of those people, and I mean this as a compliment. Like you are a very kind yet intimidating presence.
Really?
Well, just in the sense that if you're in a room, every single comic is wondering, does Brian think this joke's funny? What is Brian? I mean, and you know that, and you've earned that.
I can assure you, I don't.
But I'm looking forward to getting to know a bit about the man behind the brilliance. So I saw online you grew up in Massachusetts.
I did. I grew up in Newton, Mass. Yes, just outside of Boston. Mm-hmm.
So did you start in Boston?
I did. I started when I was in college. So what happened was I was in college and I saw a comedy show live. Like I wanted to be a comedian. I wanted to get into comedy. When I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a comedian. So when I would think of a joke, I would write it down, and I had these note cards for jokes that I was going to need someday.
So how old are we talking here?
12 or 13.
Okay.
And I kept I had like this little, it was like this little recipe box from my mom where she kept her recipes. I had my own little box, and I had like my little 3x5 note cards, and I had my jokes in there. And I would, every once in a while, think of one, and I would write it down and put it in there because I was going to need them someday. But I didn't know how people became comedians. So I was interested in comedy. I knew I wanted to be either a comedy writer, because I remember I would see the Dick Van Dyke Show as a kid and go, oh, well, shows have writers, so that's an actual job. So probably from around age 12, I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. So I was a little comedy nerd. And then when I was in college, I saw a comedy show, and the headliner, this guy, Barry Crimmins, I thought was great. So I went and talked to him, and he was running a show in Cambridge called the Ding Ho Comedy Club. And he let me go there and watch the shows for free whenever I could. And then I took a comedy class in the summer at Emerson College. I didn't go to Emerson, but I took a class there this summer, a comedy class taught by Dennis Leary. And it went well, and then they encouraged me to keep going. So I started doing open mics, and then I started getting some paid gigs. And then I graduated from college, and I just went full time.
So who was around the Ding Ho then when you were just watching? Like, was Stephen Wright still around all the time? And
It's unbelievable. It was Bobcat Goldthwait, who was like my age, and he wasn't in college. He was just doing that. And Stephen Wright and Kenny Rogerson and Lenny Clark and Steve Sweeney and Don Gavin and Paula Poundstone a little bit. But DJ Hazard, Jimmy Tingle, Kevin Meaney, Mike McDonald, Mike Donovan. It was, it had all these great headliners that I got to just sit and watch and learn from. And even things I didn't realize I was learning, I learned from them,
Like what?
Well, it wasn't until I saw Rhode Island comics who would introduce each other and shit on each other in their intros that I realized that I'd learned you're supposed to give someone a nice introduction. Like, it just seemed like common courtesy, and I didn't realize that was a thing that I had learned. But of course, you don't make fun of the person as you introduce them, where then they have to go on and they can't do their first joke. They have to address being heckled by the other comedian, so to speak, So I learned, I guess, some professionalism that I didn't even know until years later that I had learned that,
It's it's funny you bring that up. I the last show I did, I put a movie out pretty recently,
Nice.
which I thought, it was a lot. I mean, it was a freaking lot. I mean, the way I talk about it to people, I'm like, they say the camera adds 10 pounds. I think making a movie deletes 10 years. I don't know for sure, but I think that's probably the case.
I can see.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, it was amazing. I had a freaking blast, but it was a lot. It was my first one, so. But I said to the MC, I go, "Hey, can you mention that I have a movie and it's out now on Apple TV?" And I just named like one or two outlets because I don't want to like overwhelm anybody because I know that can be such a pain to like remember. And then I was like, and I'm gonna pitch it later. I'll tell them the rest. And the MC goes, "Can I say it's porn?" And I go, "If you really need to make that joke, I'm not going to tell you can't. But I mean, really?" And they go, "Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that." And so the MC goes to introduce me, and they go, "Yeah, he's got a movie. I think it's on Showtime Plus. Is it Showtime Plus?" And I go, "No, but I'll tell them what's right. Don't worry about it." Like they asked me. It was one of those things. And then they made the poor joke anyway after that. They just made the poor joke anyway. I was like, all right, okay. I guess that's what you want to do.
I remember a comic in Rhode Island introducing someone saying, "This next guy's a very funny homosexual." I'm just kidding. He's not funny.
Mm-hmm.
And that might have been the worst intro I've seen. I also would see comics would bring up female comics and always make some sex joke at their expense. So they just can't go on and do their first joke. They have to deal with this creep. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there were things that that the Boston comics did not do that they was frowned upon, fortunately, but there are things like that you learn these things and you don't even realize you're learning. It's just called common courtesy or whatever, professionalism,
Yeah. Well, and some of those headliners are still in Boston. They're still.
Oh my God. Yeah. And they're impossible to follow. They kill and they have followings and oh yeah. And they're great. They're still hilarious. It's unbelievable.
Well, the spirit's still there. Cause I mean, domestically, Boston and Minneapolis are my two favorite cities to perform in.
Well, there's so many. I think that creativity helps when you're in a creative community, and you can look at the French Impressionists in the 1880s, and I know that like in Russia, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Turgenev were all writing at the same time. It's kind of unbelievable, So I think that I'm not equating the Boston comics with those guys. I'm just saying.
A scene's a scene, though. Yeah.
It's a scene. And I do think creativity, you influence each other, you spur each other on, you you learn from each other and you inspire each other. So I think it's very hard to be a guy sitting by yourself in a basement in Iowa with no one around being really creative and really fun. It's just, you need that comedy community to help keep you sharp,
So after you finished college, where was college, by the way?
I went to Boston College.
Okay, so you finished college, and then did you hit the road? Like what happened next?
Well, I've been very lucky in many ways. So as I graduated from college, the comedy boom kind of happened right then, just kind of coincidentally. And there was a lot of work in New England. So one night you'd be at an Elks Club in Maine. And then the next night you're in a college in New Hampshire. And then the next night you're in a comedy club in Boston. And then the next night you're doing a private show in Rhode Island or in Western Mass or whatever. So also, very quickly they needed, as opposed to being in New York and doing 5-minute sets in a night, I would be doing 1.5-hour show. So I had to do 30 minutes when I didn't have 30 minutes because they needed that time filled. So it would be like an opener and a middle and a headliner, and the opener and the middle would both be doing 30, and then the headliner would be doing 45, and you're in Maine or whatever. So I just got so much stage time, and it's that Malcolm Gladwell thing about getting your 10,000 hours in. I was able to get so much stage time, and there was so much work in Boston. I was getting, paid, not lucrative gigs, but I was getting paid, and I was getting half-hour sets 5 or 6 nights a week.
So then what made you decide it was time to go to LA and write?
Oh, well, what happened was, I was doing a lot of shows, and then I started doing more topical stuff because it's easier to turn over topical stuff. So I was writing a lot of, I'd read the newspaper every day and write jokes and so on. And some friends got hired at Conan, and they contacted me and said, "Hey, we're looking for a monologue writer." And I was writing a lot of monologue type jokes at that point. So I typed up the jokes that I've been doing, and I wrote some new ones, and I sent the packet in, and they said, "Yeah, you start tomorrow." So
you were still in Boston.
I was still in Boston.
Oh, wow.
And I got the gig, and I thought I was going to do this for 13 weeks or maybe 26 weeks. The Conan show was new, and it was very shaky at the time. And there were constant rumors about Conan's going off the air and who's going to replace Conan. And, you're reading the newspaper and it's talking about your job being in jeopardy. So, and my wife had a good job in Boston. So I would commute back and forth, and then eventually moved to New York, and the show kept going and kept getting better, and we started getting nominated for Emmys, and we started kind of being like, oh, I think we're going to hang in here for a while. And then so I came to LA only with Conan when he moved the show in 2009. So, what I thought was a job for 13 weeks ended up being 27 years, and maybe 28 years now if you include the Oscars that we just did. So I was quite lucky. So
I remember when Conan moved the show to Los Angeles, because there was that sketch about it where he forgot to move to LA. It was the opening sketch where he was doing his to do. What was the reason that he moved to LA though? Was it a network thing or?
Yes. So he had hosted the show Late Night, which David Letterman had that show, and then Dave at 12:30 on NBC, and then Dave moved to CBS at the 11:30 spot, had the Late Show. So Conan took over for Dave. So that was very daunting to follow a legend like that. And Conan had no experience on camera like that. So that was a big leap. But he pulled it off and had the late night show for 16 years or whatever it was. And then NBC gave him The Tonight Show in 2009. So, and they wanted it, the show was out in LA and they wanted it to be in LA. So that was the reason we all moved here. And then, the show didn't really work out for us, but, and then that was a bit of a nightmare. And then, but we all landed on our feet and then he got the show at TBS and, had a long run there. So, it all kind of worked out.
So, when you say it was a nightmare, I mean, I know the stuff that was on the surface because it was all over the news. And I remember when Conan gave his speech about it, that I actually felt was a really powerful message to anybody who has a dream. I mean, I was just starting to get some feature work at that point in my life. And I was, I think I was living in Pittsburgh. And I remember when he was just talking about, if you have a dream or want to be in show business, just be kind and amazing things will happen. And I remember it was like a really beautiful sentiment.
He's such an incredibly smart guy and he's a very thoughtful person. And whenever he has any kind of assignment, you can see why he was like an A student at Harvard, like whenever he has an assignment, he takes it very seriously. He has very insightful ideas, and he works on things to make sure they're really just honed just right, So I'm always amazed at his ability to just strike the right tone with those when he has to, because normally he's just so silly, but when he needs to be thoughtful, he's very capable of doing that.
So you've done incredibly well in a particular field in comedy that's notorious for a lot of people just go job to job if they're lucky, and you've kept a job for a very, very long time. So what is the key to longevity?
I think there's a few things. I think that you have to have a good chemistry with your boss. There are other people that I don't think I could have worked for that long with or whatever, I was fortunate that Conan and I, we had a lot in common. We're two Irish Catholic guys from Boston and we're from big families and we have a lot of the same, we have a similar background in a lot of ways. And so we had a lot in common, and I think he is very loyal to his employees, and I think he has a bunch of people that worked for him for a long time, which speaks well of him. I think, some people, there's a lot of turnover on their show, and they're constantly firing people and whatever. I think they're very. I think at Conan they're very hesitant to fire anybody. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but they try and make sure when they hire people that they make good choices and it's a good fit. And occasionally it's not, but for the most part, a lot of people work there for many, many years. And I think that speaks well of him,
What's kind of a peek under the hood on your writing process?
Well, I guess it depends on what I'm writing. What I've kind of learned, when I was young, I would write late at night and I would stay up late and I'd go to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning and I'd be writing at midnight. And I felt that was sort of my most creative time. Now that I'm old, I have to write first thing in the morning is when my brain is freshest. And I like to write then when I first wake up I'm just more sharp at that time. And what I'll do often the day before, I'll think of a couple of things during the day, and I'll kind of put them in my phone so that I'm not starting with a blank page. And what I like to do generally is before I have breakfast, before I do anything, I sit and I try to write 5 jokes. And usually I have one or two at least ideas, or sometimes I thought of a joke the day before that, or sometimes I think of an area where there's something comedic about this premise. And I'll put that in my phone. So when I start the day, I'm usually not starting completely from scratch. But so I'll sit for 20 minutes or half an hour and I'll write about 5 jokes. And that's usually what I go for. It's good not to, if I try to write 10 every day or every morning, I think it would get burnt out. I think 5 is a nice number where I know I can knock it off in a half hour. And if I can get 1 or 2 that I think, yesterday I wrote a couple that I think, oh, these are pretty good. And today my 5 were pretty bad. So, but, you're not going to be as sharp every day and all that kind of thing. But I think, if you want to be a professional golfer, I think you just got to go play golf every day. And I think for me, just having that time in the morning, it's almost like going, as if I were a golfer, just going to hit a bucket of balls first thing every morning, and whatever your thing is, don't overdo it, but don't underdo it either. So find the right number for you, whatever it is you're doing, I think.
So getting a little bit more into like the specific mechanics for you, like when you sit down to write your 5, do you have, this is totally for my stand-up versus I'm going to pitch this to, I guess in the past, Conan later, or this is meant for TV or, what have you?
Yeah. So when I used to write a lot of topical jokes for my act. And once I started a Conan, I stopped doing that. So I didn't want to have that moral dilemma of, do I keep this for me or give it to him? So I lost a ton of material when I started because I just gave him everything topical and I just wrote personal things for me. And what I think the best advice I guess I can give anyone who's trying is the premise has to be plausible. They have to buy that this happened to you. I worked with a guy a month ago and he did a joke about, I have a friend who's a cannibal, and then blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you don't. We're not on board. That didn't, So I'm not saying it has to be true. It has to at least ring true. Sometimes something is true, but it's not believable, even though it's actually true. And something is just made up, but it seems perfectly normal that whatever, you went to the dry cleaners and what they didn't have, whatever the thing is. So having a believable setup, hopefully an interesting and believable setup, is what I'm looking for when I sit down to write jokes.
What is the key to the perfect one-liner?
Well, I think that a joke can be a great joke, but it might not fit you. You know what I mean? There was a guy in Boston years ago who's a very handsome sort of male model guy, and he jokes about, my girlfriend's 300 pounds and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, no, she isn't. We saw your girlfriend come in with you. She's nothing like that. Do you know what I mean? So, and then conversely, you see other guys talking about, I'm dating a model, or it's like, no, you're not, buddy. You know what I mean? So I think the joke, you kind of learn a lot about how people perceive you. I did a lot of my jokes when I started were beyond self-deprecating. They were so self-loathing, and I think the crowd was kind of like, hey, take it easy, buddy. You're not that bad. Do you know what I mean? So, but finding jokes that fit you, where people that Woody Allen thing about that they believe that it happened if only to you. You know, Steve Wright could do jokes about, I'm moving to another planet soon. So if you have any empty boxes, I'd really appreciate it. Where, when I first started, I love Stephen Wright, and I would try to do off the wall jokes like that. But if I said I'm moving to another planet soon, people would be like, "No, you're not. What are you talking about?" Do you know what I mean? So you learn. That's one of the things you learn in stand-up is how you perceive yourself may not be how other people perceive you, and you learn how the public perceives you. There was a funny Alan. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. There's a great comic from New York who does a bit about how they. I'm gonna look up his name here because I'm sorry, Alan Havey.
No worries. Alan Havey.
Oh my God! I hope this doesn't get back to him. I'm gonna get So he's a great comic, and he has this bit about how in New York, like the people that are trying to sell you stuff on the street, they size you up, and they'll be like, "Hey, soccer mom. Hey, businessman, hey, whatever," and they would yell these things, and that's how you learn how. And I remember when I was in New York City, and this guy was trying to sell me his CDs or something. He goes, "Hey, coach." I was wearing a sweatshirt and whatever, and it just made me laugh so hard. Of like, oh, okay, I look like a football coach or something. So. Yeah, I think having setups that are believable, and I think there's also something interesting about everybody. I worked with this guy years ago who he had the worst act you've ever seen, and then afterwards it was just the most generic thing you ever whatever. And then afterwards, he was talking about how he grew up Quaker and they spoke in Middle English with this and thou and blah, blah. And it was like, why aren't you talking
about that? Yeah.
That's such a unique thing that I've never heard anyone talk about. It's so interesting. And there was a guy I took a acting class with 30 years ago, and his name was Joe Smith. And he was average looking and average height and everything. And I was kind of fascinated by him because I was like, this is the most average guy I've ever met. His name is Joe Smith, and he's almost cartoonishly ordinary. And
was the class just something on his bucket list? It was a New Year's resolution because that would like really go totally average.
I don't know whatever happened to him, but it was the kind of thing I was thinking as a stand-up, being that ordinary would be a great hook.
Mm-hmm.
And normally everyone has some little unique thing about themselves. And that was his unique thing, was being ununique,
That's awesome. So how would you, I want to get to some kind of state of the industry stuff with you. Like where do you feel like comedy writing is heading in Los Angeles and just in general?
Terrible. It's terrible. There are so few sitcoms on now. There's like 3 sitcoms on the air now. And they used to be like 35, like in the 90s or something. So that's all these writing jobs that don't exist right now. And there's all these talented writers that are out of work. I just worked on the Oscars with Conan. One of the writers was a guy who'd been writing on sitcoms. He's brilliant. He hasn't worked in a couple of years. He's in his 40s. Like he should be in his prime. He was great on the Oscars and really helped us. And he's great at solving problems whenever some logical issue comes up with a joke or with something. And he'd be great in the room. And it's awful that there are so many talented people who should be on shows who are not on shows right now because the sitcoms they just don't exist.
What do you think the fix is for all that?
I think what needs to happen is I think it's maybe if one sitcom can kind of really explode uh, and be a big hit, the networks be like, "Hey, we need more of that," and people might be like, "We need more of that." And it's my daughter's a young person who loves sitcoms. She's seen every episode of Friends multiple times, and The Office, and Parks and Rec, and all these things. And I know that I love old sitcoms, and I happily rewatch old Dick Van Dykes and Odd Couples and Mary Tyler Morris and things, Bob Newhart's. But I look at my daughter, who's a young person who's still obsessed with sitcoms, and I think that there's a market for. If I don't know that there's a show on now that has catches her eye, but I think if one can maybe break through, I think people will kind of remember how much we love sitcoms.
Yeah, I mean, so I watched the new Frasier, and before I found out that my wife had never watched the original Frasier.
Wow, okay.
So we took that opportunity to start at the beginning before we watched the new stuff. And I used to love that show as a kid, so it was amazing revisiting it as an adult and realizing the jokes that went over my head, first of all.
Sure, of course.
And also just, as somebody who's, writing, it's, man, that was just tight as a rubber band. And that was a common formula back then. And I'm not saying every comedy needs to be that. There's different ways, but I feel like, man, there's such an appetite for those types of shows still.
Absolutely. And there were brilliant people writing those shows who I'm sure are still available. They should be writing more shows. It makes no sense to me, that these brilliant comedic minds are out of work. I'm just bewildered, And just selfishly, I'd love to have a sitcom that I came, the couple shows that are on now I watch, and I'd love to have other shows that was like a must-see TV,
Well, 90s nostalgia is so in right now. And now the fashion is back, which I'm an older millennial, so it's really trippy for me because I see middle school kids now and I go, that was me. You are dressed the exact same as I was when I was your age. It's so weird. And now I know how, and I guess it's always cyclical, right? It's so that's been weird for me seeing that. And now I'm wondering, I'm like, well, when are we going to have the nostalgia for the way, the multicam comedies were back then? When's that happening?
Yes. I really hope it comes back soon. I would love to write on a sitcom. I grew up watching sitcoms. I'd love to be in a room pitching jokes from the sitcom. All right, what's the last joke on this scene or whatever? I think that would be so much fun.
Well, what was your take on just, to kind of get a little insider still, like, were you happy with the result of the last strike or like, how do you see just the state of the industry with everything, that you've experienced in your 27 years plus?
I have to say the first strike really impacted me a lot because I think I was delusional in the sense you feel like you're in control of your life and that you're making your decisions. And that's one nice thing about being a stand-up is you pick whatever jokes you want to, whatever topics you want to talk about, how you want to do it. And you're kind of your own producer and your own director. And you make all the creative choices and, you go through life feeling like you're kind of in charge of your life and so on. And then when you have a strike like that, you realize, oh, there are these people that are above me, that they make these decisions that impact me, and there's nothing I can do about it. And you're actually feeling quite helpless. And and I was sort of naive in the sense of, yeah, that's how the world works, you know. Two governments decide to go to war, and you get drafted, and you go in, you're in the army, you know, whatever, and you know, that's been going on for centuries, and you know, nobody's in charge of their life, or just the people at the top are, you know. So I don't pay too much attention to the state of the industry or things beyond my control. I just kind of because I think that I think it's very depressing, and then it sort of makes you go, oh, what's the point, you know? And you know, I still I write my spec scripts, and it's like, is anyone gonna make this sitcom? Is anyone can I even pitch it anytime or whatever? Maybe not, but if I thought that way, I'd never get anything done. So I have to think of, no, I'm doing this for me. I'm enjoying this. I'm trying to make this script better than the last one, and hope that I can get that somebody will want to see it and want to green light it and all that stuff. And I can't think that far down the road, because otherwise I wouldn't do anything.
Right. Yeah. You know? Do you have a preference, writing versus performing?
I think I would be, you know, I know there are these comics who they create a sitcom to star themselves, and they go to pitch it, and the network will say, we love the idea, we're not going to put you in it, we're going to do whatever. And if that happened to me, I'd be like, fine with me. If you want to do it, I'm happy to write it and be the creator. And I like to have, you know, creative control, but I don't have this, oh, I've got to be the star. I've got to be the, you know, if I wrote a movie and they'd go, we want Kevin Hart to play this, or Adam Sandler, I would be like, fine with me. You know what I mean? So I would like to create something that has some lasting quality to it, you know, and that people go, oh, that people can look back 20 years later and go, oh, that was a good movie, or that was a good show, or whatever, you know. But I don't have this burning desire to be a star or anything like that. I do enjoy stand-up, and I enjoy a feeling of accomplishment. And, you know, when I would get on the David Letterman show or something like that, it really made me feel good, like I accomplished something, you know. And people always say, well, this could lead to this. It's like, I always kind of looked at it as, I'm just gonna go on here and do the best I can, and hopefully it goes well. And I took comfort in, this is going to sound weird, but I took comfort in, my life isn't going to change tomorrow, because I think that there were all these comics in the old days who they worked their whole lives to be on the Johnny Carson show, and they'd get on the Johnny Carson show and they'd do great. And then they were back in the same clubs and back in the same place, and they would really get depressed, where they thought their whole life was going to change. Do you know what I mean? And I was so excited when I did the Letterman, you know, when I would get to go on Letterman, but I thought my life tomorrow is going to be exactly the same. And I don't have, you're putting too much pressure on yourself of, oh, if I can do well, this will lead to a movie deal or a TV deal or whatever. It's, to me, the reward was getting on the Letterman show, and you don't get a reward for getting a reward, that, you know? So, I do like when I feel like I've accomplished something. So in that aspect, whenever I would get to do stand up on a show or something, that always made me feel good. But I guess I enjoy both. But I mean, if I got a job tomorrow working in a sitcom and I was there, 18 hours a day, and I couldn't go out and do stand up, I'd be okay with that, because I could just, at some point, you can always go back to stand up, you know, it's always going to be there. So
if you had to choose between a stand up stage or a writer's room, and for some weird reason you could only have one,
I guess I probably would choose the writer's room unless it was a terrible show. And, when I was in my 20s, I would come out to LA to do Evening at the Improv or something like that. But most of the time I was in Boston, and every once in a while I'd come out for a week and have an audition or do a Evening at the Improv or some kind of show like that. And what would happen is I'd get on these shows, and they would say, one of the other comics, they go, so-and-so writes for blah, blah, blah. And it'd be the worst show you've ever heard of. And it would be some terrible sitcom or something. And then they'd go on and be really funny. And I'd be like, wait, how can that person be so funny? And they write for such an awful show. And it's like, well, that happens because, even the worst shows have a lot of, it's like, even the worst baseball team has a lot of great baseball players on that team. It just, for whatever reason, it doesn't gel, So that was quite eye-opening for me. So I think that kind of thing, if I was writing on a show I was ashamed of, I was lucky writing on Conan, and I never had to write on a show that I was like, oh, and ashamed of, like I couldn't admit to people what I was working on or whatever, So I think I would take the writing gig unless it was something that was just so bad I couldn't live with myself.
Fair enough. So what advice would you have for somebody who's starting out today or still kind of in the LA trenches?
It's the first advice, when people want to have a cup of coffee with me or talk to me on the phone and get some, the first thing I always say to people is don't ruin your life. And I know that sounds silly, but there was a guy I knew years ago who I met him when I moved to New York, and he said, I want to be a comedy writer, blah, blah, blah. And he was in his 40s with a family, and he quit his job to pursue comedy. And it was a terrible idea, and it cut to a year later, his wife's left him.
Oh, no.
He's got his wife's at the school play with another dude. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And, I have another friend who, he was a lawyer. He wanted to be a screenwriter. So he would get up at 4 a.m. every day, and he would write from 4 to 6. And then he'd go to work and do his job. And he's sold 5 movies. And he's able to quit his job that he didn't want to do, but he didn't ruin his life. So I think there are people that, somebody will be like a big comedian in there, in Kansas City. And then they move to LA and they barely get on stage, and they're living in a studio apartment, and they're 50 years old, and it's like, you had a nice house in Kansas City, and you were what's wrong with that? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I always tell people, don't ruin your life. And I have some people, I had this young woman she had 5 kids, like under 10, and she was funny, but she can't go on the road. You know what I mean? So it's like, do a show or two during the, if you can get out once or twice a week and do a show, and if you enjoy it, that's great. But you can't, don't ruin your family. Don't ruin your life. I think I was fortunate in that when I was started in comedy, I didn't have anybody depending on me, and I could travel. I could do open mics. I could do, I could be out every night. And so your life has to lend itself to that. There are people that I think are very funny, but they have a lot of responsibilities, and they can't do shows every night. They can't be traveling. They can't go full time. So that's my first advice to people. And, my friend Lori Kilmartin, she always says, if you want to be a comedian, do it every night for 10 years and you'll be good at it. And it really is what it takes. And people don't want to hear that. People want to be a star quickly. People want, be famous right away and whatever. But you really have to put your time in to be a good comedian.
What do you got coming up?
Well, it's so funny. So I'm back out on the road. I'm kind of back out in the wild, and I do like seeing new places. I got to do my first military tour last summer.
Oh, cool.
We did Kuwait and Bahrain and UAE and Saudi Arabia, Qatar. So getting to perform for the troops was really fun. They would show us stuff during the day. You would get to sit in a tank, or they would get to operate their remote control drone or whatever. It was really cool. I did shows in Israel last year, and that was very intense with everything that's going on. Just traveling and writing, and I've gotten to go to many states and see many things. I did a show for a guy in Ohio a couple of years ago, and he books one show a year at this big theater, and they have 3 comics, and nobody comes back. And he's done it for 30-something years.
Oh, wow.
Everyone comes in, does this one. So when I got there, he said, the prison, the former prison where they shot the movie Shawshank, is down the road. Would you like to get a tour? And I was like, yeah. So he took me, and, they showed where they shot the movie. It had been a real prison in the 1800s, and it was fascinating getting this guided tour. And he said, I've offered every comedian that in 33 years, and you're the only one that's ever taken me up on it.
Wow. Really?
And I'm sure a lot of comedians just fly in the afternoon and do the show at night and fly out, and they're, that kind of thing. But yeah, whenever I travel, I love to, if I can see something that's not at home that I've never seen before, absolutely. I try to take that in,
Brian, thanks so much for doing this, man.
Sure. So fun. I love talking comedy, and I will talk about it for hours, and I never tire of it. So I hope I appreciate you having me.
That was Brian Kiley. Check out all of his stuff. See if he's coming to a city near you. He is touring again. That is awesome. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxena. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, please. Those reviews really help. This is still a new podcast. Anything you can do in that department really makes a big difference. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/RonFlacone. For Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool perks. We do a Zoom hangout once a month, which is a really, really cool gathering of like-minded people. I tell some jokes. We chat it out. It's a really, really good time. There's also insider information to new films and projects, free tickets to my shows when applicable and possible, and full stand-up clips, not available anywhere else. I knew there was one last thing that I usually drop that I was forgetting. So it's a really, really fun time. And, of course, you get the 1,000 episodes before they're released to the public. Y'all, 87. The Cure has released Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. My favorite Cure album, I gotta say. It's a tough call, too. But I gotta say, 1987's Kiss Me is my favorite Cure album for a number of reasons. A good number of reasons. I won't get into all that now. I will say Robert Smith, definitely someone I am desperately trying to get on this show. And we got a lot more episodes to go. There are still over 900 possibilities to get Robert Smith. All right, we'll catch you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Flacone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.